Hello and welcome to this live stream hosted by Uno AI. I am your guest host. My name is Ron Eddings. I'm the CEO, co-founder of Hacker Valley Media, and I'll be helping navigate this conversation and talk about this conversation of how to navigate the AI revolution as it relates to governance, risk, and compliance in cybersecurity. Let me tell you something. We have two great speakers, two great members of Uno AI that are really changing the game of how we're looking at security operations, governance, risk, and compliance with this new AI lens and shift. Our first guest and also co-founder and CEO of Uno AI is Shashank. Shashank, welcome to your very own party. Welcome to the stream.
Well, thank you for having me. Yeah, super exciting to be here, Ron. It's always fun speaking with you and bringing this to our audience. And let's hope we have a fantastic 1 hour and the audience loves it.
Yes, we absolutely will. And to also kick off the conversation, we also have a great team member of yours that we spent a lot of time with, got to know about, the product and also what you all are going to do to bring it to the market. We have your go-to-market strategist and also former founder and leader, Andy Andrews. Welcome to the stream, sir.
Hey, thanks, Ron.
Yes. Thank you both. Thank you for having us. And I think it would only be right to share a little bit about Uno AI with the audience. What do you all do? What are you hoping to accomplish? Let's start with you, Shashank.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the best way to understand Uno AI is that it's a thinking machine. The entire idea is, have force multiplication and let the AI do a lot of the heavy lifting, right? We've come to this point, this juncture in the evolution of technology where we are able to have the AI do a lot of the difficult tasks, the tasks that only humans could accomplish. And that's where Uno AI is kind of bringing in its platform, filling the gaps, and just allowing teams to go at 30x the speed, 10x the scale across board as far as cybersecurity goes. Now, there are some areas like GRC, for example, where the impact is even bigger, right? Because there is a lot of cumbersome, mundane, and tedious work that is just part by design, right? And so I think in those areas where you have a lot of cumbersome pieces, it's even more apparent and visible in terms of the difference, in terms of the impact it can make. So that's what we do essentially. We're building a platform to essentially make all the analysts in the world of GRC and cybersecurity happier and get their jobs done sooner, right?
That's the way to go. And you said 30x faster, 30x more scale. Is it 30x cheaper? I would imagine not, but I just wanted to throw that in as a little bit of a joke. But there's a lot of interest in this space, especially when you look at things like AI. ChatGPT changed everyone's life last year. You all were founded before the ChatGPT era, so kudos to you for getting the head start and really understanding, how to make an impact. But we're here to talk about a little bit about GRC today, and it begs the question, why GRC focusing on this space and why now?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question actually, and very relevant, of course, for the topic today, right? So, first thing to look at is again, like what I was trying to allude to, is GRC, for better or for worse, has become very complex over the years, right? And part of it is just the fact that regulatory and standards body led expectations have gone up, right? And so every company needs to up their game in terms of their compliance, risk management, and overall governance. So on one side, you've got the expectations, which is nonstop sort of on that upswing and the trajectory of more and more and more, right? Now, simultaneously, the technology and the tools and the processes that we have to kind of respond to that demand seems to be a little left behind in time. It is still very much, a world of legacy. And so I think if you start looking at that world, there is a wide gap with an increasing demand, right? And so I think that purely on that light alone, it makes it one of those segments that certainly needs help, right? And the timing couldn't be better because the technology is correct, the technology can make things possible, and therefore now you can leverage that and use it to kind of take it to that next level of bridging that gap, right? So I think like that's what makes it both exciting and also I think makes it very appropriate as far as why now is concerned. So that's my 2 cents in the mix.
Yeah, and when I did the intro, I accidentally said Andy Andrews. Andy is one of the people that have the first name thing is actually Andy Anderson. So sorry about that, Andy.
Not a worry.
One thing that I know about both you and Shashank is that you both had an experience on Wall Street. You guys really helped Wall Street with some of these automation challenges. And with when you look at something like Wall Street, I would imagine there's a lot of regulatory pieces that come along with it. And I'm sure you're seeing that same lens here in cybersecurity, especially when you're looking at things like GRC. It's all about regulation and compliance and following standards and best practices. So I wanted to throw the question to you, Andy. How does your previous experience and your current experience looking at the GRC space, how does that kind of fit into your view and lens on Uno?
Yeah, I mean, I think to sort of build on what Shashank was talking about, I think you've seen sort of the pendulum swing in terms of the amount of scrutiny that regulators are bringing to the overall, to companies overall, and politicians react to kind of what's in the news, right? And I think you certainly are seeing sort of cyber events hit the news in a big way, right? Just over the last couple of sort of months, there was this big, sort of United Healthcare
Hmm.
issue that was literally impacting people's ability to get their prescriptions and go to the doctor and all of those sorts of things. The Colonial Pipeline issue that happened a couple of years ago, which impacted the ability for people literally to get gas. When that happened, it was sort of the images of the 70s and the gas lines that happened there. You saw those headlines, and I think the Washington has reacted in a way and wanted to say we're on top of this issue, and so then the politicians sort of push things down to the various departments that are beneath them, and trying to kind of get their arms around this issue. And the way that they're doing it is imposing a lot of regulation, and with that, not just the regulation, but actual auditing and fining of organizations. And so you're just seeing that kind of at every level of government, and that's true in the U.S., but it's also true globally as well. So I think I was reading recently, eight states have imposed some different regulations that are coming to essentially coming online in the next year. Obviously, there was a big change with the SEC guidance around cybersecurity and cyber and reporting. That all went into effect essentially at the
Hmm.
beginning of this year. It's going to hit sort of smaller public companies just in the next couple of months, and that's on top of kind of a wave of other pieces. So.
Right. When I think about this space, I get a little bit of a headache. And I get a headache on the GRC space because I know how much focus and time and attention that it really takes. Like you were just speaking about fines and getting your hands smacked. Like that's never a good part of anyone's day. But one thing that I do know is that it's the perfect time for change. And you all kind of saw that first and you created Uno. And in addition to just starting this company, I'm sure you saw that there are companies that want to make a change because they're looking at hundreds or thousands of pages of information or regulatory requirements. So, in addition to bringing in a new technology, how have you all seen workflows or just processes change with, GRC?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and I think it's a very relevant one because certainly with the increased demand, right, just the need for larger expectations, as I was saying earlier, teams have had to reassess and reorganize themselves to kind of respond to it. right? And
Hmm.
so what we have ended up seeing over the last, I would say, a decade and more, is that one, you obviously have more hands on deck. So that has certainly happened, right? And that has happened both in terms of expanding your internal teams, but also supplementing with external consultants, right? And that has, of course, led to larger service revenue and a whole barrage of GRC consultants in the market today. And then on the other front, there definitely has been emphasis on automation, right? But I think the way we think about it, automation has largely been focused on workflow automation, right? Where your approval process, your data collection process, your sort of documentation process, your document storage and retrieval process have been automated out. And I think the world has done well on that count, because obviously, even getting those done is important, and getting those done is necessary, because without that, you are quite literally doing every single piece of the puzzle manually, right?
Right.
Which is not scalable, it's hard, and as you rightly said, and I'm going to kind of rephrase and use a word, it's mind numbing, right? Because it's not fun work, right? Now, what we have seen though is that although that solves like the base level problem of at least the documents are stored properly, yes, you can have your approvals going through electronically as opposed to somebody quite literally signing on a piece of paper. Yes, you can have the various versions all available online, and yes, you will be able to retrieve them, and in some cases, in smaller enterprises, in SME type setups, you might be able to even automate a bit of that evidence collection, right? Which is where we've seen a lot of startups emerge over the last decade and more, and do very well in the broader sort of risk and compliance arena, right? Now, having said that, though, I think that when you start looking at slightly larger side enterprises, think banks, credit unions, healthcare companies, critical infrastructure companies, manufacturing entities, anybody who's doing any work that has a ton of data and regulation and broader expectations from a standards body standpoint. um, some of this automation is just a small sliver, a small part of the overall picture, right? Like they still have to do a whole lot of activities around understanding the ramifications of changes, responding to regulators and the people that they do business with to make sure that they are compliant, that they have the controls in place. They have expectations around internal audits and assessments, expectations around third-party risk management, and then expectations around honestly quantifying and understanding risk, right, at multiple levels. So the moment you start getting into that realm, which is not very unrealistic for a lot of these mid to larger enterprises, you start seeing that it starts becoming immensely complex, and it becomes so complex that a lot of that automation just solves like the 5-10% of the problem, and you still have this humongous beast of the 80-90% of the problem that gets one way or the other done by humans, right? Whether humans internally or supplemented via consultants. And perhaps sometimes, it gets augmented with a few scripts and tools here and there, right? But those are like Excel sheet type of tools, right? Tools that humans use just to make their own life a little easier. We are not looking at really replacing that work or automating that piece of work out, at least over the last 10 years, right? And just to kind of conclude on that question that you were saying, I think that's the piece, the 80%, which is the big white space that the world needs help in, is what we are trying to go after. We're saying, sure enough, you've got the evidence collection, you've got the sort of basic record keeping in place, fantastic, and that's absolutely necessary. But I think there is a wide gap on top that needs to be addressed, right? And that's what we're trying to solve here, really.
Yeah,
Right.
I think I would kind of build on kind of what Shashank was talking about. I think when you think about the way that sort of GRC and the reason for GRC and how the tools have kind of been built up, uh, it actually makes me think a lot around kind of what Wall Street and the way Wall Street has sort of worked over many years, right? I think where over the last maybe 20 years or so, the goal of GRC was really to centralize a lot of data, right? Like you had data, particularly around risk and kind of policies kind of spread throughout organizations. And okay, let's bring all of this data together, all the information that individual or, parts of an organization and literally people across the organization have. And it's almost as though like, oh, let's go put them all on a trading floor. Let's go combine the information that they have and open outcry market. We'll now understand what are the real what's the price of and value of stuff. That's kind of what was happening, and a lot of the systems there are essentially built to standardize some of that data, gather data from all of these people. And it's effective, but it is, it's a little bit like herding cats, right? Like you look at what the workflows are, and the workflows are like, ask Bob this, have him tell Susie that, right? And then we'll put that all into kind of a single place. And now you look at sort of where Wall Street is now, and those central places don't exist as like places, and it's not really humans again providing that information. It's really, it's machines, it's Bloomberg terminals, it's like a central place where it's gathered all of that data, and the machine has analyzed it, and then you can put that into a single, you can trade on it, you can do whatever you want. An individual can run around the world in terms of pricing. And I think that's where sort of GRC is going to go as well, where and the potential for AI, it doesn't require kind of human input at anywhere near of the level. You're not gathering data from all of these people. You're gathering it, particularly in the IT space, directly from the systems, right? Like what is your cybersecurity posture based on what's really there? And I think that's kind of the flip that we're going to see, and the potential change. And if you think of the amount of volumes of trading, ability for a single individual to trade markets, all of those things, I think you'll see similar kind of explosion in terms of potential in GRC capabilities.
Yeah, I could only imagine the potential. And before I switch into this next phase, I did want to let everyone know that's attending live that this is a live session. So as we're going through it, be sure to drop any questions that you have for either Shashank or Andy into the live chat on YouTube. Or, we would also love to hear, where are you joining from? So also drop where you're joining from into the chat. We would love to bring that up on the screen for everyone's own information. These two gentlemen are in sunny California. They are in Silicon Valley, and I'm here in Austin, Texas. So, continuing on this conversation of GRC, I would imagine that there is a lot of opportunity for someone to have automated action. One of my favorite things about using AI, especially things like ChatGPT, is taking a long document. We use internally at Hacker Valley, we take our meeting transcripts, we put them into ChatGPT. We say, parse through this and let me know what's most important. And hey, look, we got Toronto in the house. Welcome, Javier. I like to distill a lot of information into less information and make an informed decision. So, talk to us a little bit about Uno and how does AI, really help someone? What is that specific outcome that someone could hope or expect, looking at something like this?
Yeah, it's actually a phenomenal point that you're making, right? And I think I want to sort of split that a little bit, parse it, and then give an example of how Uno, the platform, really kind of addresses that, right, in the context of GRC. So you made a very good example. You said, hey, there are meetings that go on and transcripts get recorded, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you don't have to indulge in copious amounts of note taking anymore.
Right.
And it's not only about note taking, but going back to it sometimes is also a whole a complex activity of its own, because I suffer from that. I'm one of those paper note takers, and then I have reams of paper sitting out there, right? So I feel like so that's one challenge around, even if you are disciplined, you have a lot of effort to make. Then the second part is that it's a lot of paper, it's a lot of reading, right? So at the end of the day, you are dealing with a lot of textual content. And the reality is that a lot of people in these disciplines, cybersecurity, governance, risk compliance, just overall, I would say, technology management, or any aspect of organizational workflows of these form, aren't necessarily, people who love, sort of reading and indulging in literary type activity on a daily basis, right? Like in fact, at some level, they may never signed up for it, right? Like I think they may all have their own passion to read a few things, but nobody enjoys reading complex, legal s, or complex structured documents, sit down there and spend their whole day reading it, right? So there's also this element of sort of mental fatigue, if you may, that is involved in this job. And if you're not reading, and if you're not reading it with a lot of attention to detail, you would be missing out a lot of things, right? Which would lead to its own ramifications of being, slapped on your hand, or making the wrong judgment calls, etc., right? And so I think that that is really where the first value add of Uno starts coming in. When we started building this out, our whole quest was, can we automate that? Can we take away this burden of understanding the language and making sense of it from a human to a machine? Is it possible, right? And we've seen that in the world of chat GPT, where you can feed in stuff and it can do a few things. We've seen that with note takers, right, in meetings lately, which come in and sit by our side and very diligently making note of everything, summarizes and gives it to us at the end of the meeting. Now, the question is, can we also build a system, a machine of a similar form for the world of GRC? But, well, that system also needs to be domain specific. That system needs to understand those documents. That system needs to understand those nuances. That system needs to have the concept of working in an organizational context. That system needs to have the ability to make decisions, right? And so that's where we kind of approached it, right? And so that's the bucket, that's the piece where Uno shines. And that's where a lot of the power of language models combined with organizational context, which in our world manifests in the form of a knowledge graph, essentially a knowledge graph time machine, they come together beautifully. And now what they end up doing is they replicate the same intelligence, the same power that
Mm.
a smart, and I would even use the word very deliberately, non-fatigued, enthusiastic analyst would use, right? And so, so I think like that's basically what we're trying to replicate, right? And I think the idea also is that being a machine, if you're able to replicate that well and enhance it further and make it a smart system, well, you're also guaranteed consistency, because for better or for worse, the machine is not suffering from the human fatigue that we all do, right? However
Mhm.
committed we may be, just doing any activity, and especially if it's tedious and cumbersome over and over and over again, can be taxing on our brains, can be taxing on our well-being, can be taxing on our concentration, and can be taxing on our overall motivation, right? So I think all those sort of side problems, but important ones, also get solved as a part of these productivity and speed benefits that you see.
Right.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, just to, you know, to put some numbers around kind of the volumes that we're talking about, right? I think I was reading the other day, from a financial perspective, a large financial institution, there's something like 3 million pages of regulations that they need to, um, be understanding and potentially complying with, right? I mean, we're not talking. I mean, that's literally could take decades to read, right? And then and you look at, like, perhaps one of the frameworks, right, like NIST 800-73, which is kind of
Mhm.
like the National Institute for Standards and Technology. That sort of that document is almost 500 pages, right? I mean, it's and then you think of each one of those pages is pretty dense, right? Like it's often referring to other documents, other pieces. I mean, it's truly mind-boggling in terms of the amount of material that a single individual would try and understand. And what I think is interesting is and which is why, when you see these GRC programs, what they're trying to do is like herd cats, right? It's get all of these people who maybe understand a little piece of the problem of the puzzle, and can, we pull this jigsaw puzzle together collectively. What's interesting is that the thing that makes it so challenging for humans, huge amounts of data volume, uh, is actually incredibly valuable when you think about training an AI model and being able to release it on, it's a river of data, right? And particularly when
Yep.
you think about the new Gen AI models that are very, very good with language and can take some of that, what is sort of semi-structured or unstructured data, and start to build patterns and structure around it. They love that. It's like a kid in the candy store for the Gen AI models to run around with all this data. So yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. In fact, I'm very compelled to share a quick little joke, right? Like what you mentioned, what is tedious and cumbersome, painful for humans is actually like exciting for the machines. I saw once a guy running, practicing with diligence on a track with a shirt which said at the back, "Your punishment is my sport." because
Mm,
that's what happens, right? You don't play well, you're made to run around the field, but
right.
that's my thing, like I enjoy it. It's kind of like that, right? Like in the machines, we're getting frustrated with the paperwork, we're getting frustrated there's too much of it. Well, that's when the machine shines, right? Like that's
Yeah,
when it can actually get better.
100%. My background is in security architecture. I've worked for a lot of companies. One that comes to mind is when I worked for a fintech startup, and there was exercises that we would go through quarterly. We had to meet compliance standards for a variety of things, PCI being one. And then when we were going public, there was also a lot of questionnaires that we had to fill out leading up to going through that IPO. And there was so much time that had passed between one questionnaire to another. Like, so at one point we were asked about our assets and the state of those assets. So they have monitoring installed on them. How many are there? Which ones don't? Which ones are in production? And we filled out these questionnaires, and then a month later or a few months later, we would have to fill them out again. And you mentioned, like, machines learning over time. So like with something like Uno or what you all are building, is there that component where you fill something out once and then it's a little bit easier to fill it out the next time?
Oh, 100%. In fact, the way we have thought about this problem space is that even the first time you should start seeing some benefits right out the gate, right? And so, to kind of give you a little bit more nuance behind the scenes, because I think sometimes the benefits aren't totally conceptualized the same way until you understand what's going on behind the scenes. So, what really ends up happening with Uno is that you deal with both structured and unstructured data, right? And that's the reality of large organizations, because that's a starting point, right? You've got documents lying around, you've got standard operating procedures sitting out there, you have policies, you obviously have the regulatory frameworks and guidance notes and circulars pouring in from third party, whether it's a regulator or whether it's a company that you do business with. And then on the other side, you're absolutely right. There are all these assessment documents or audit centric documents. Either you're asking somebody to fill it for you or you're filling it
Hmm.
for somebody, right? There's always that going on both sides. And what really ends up happening today in most organizations, especially larger organizations, is that um, the filling of those questionnaires, as an example, right? Let's just take that specific case, is very detached from the actual risk management or the actual inventory keeping or the actual understanding of what vulnerabilities are lurking in my system, or how do I see the sort of evolution of my threat surface, right? They're almost like two different activities. On one side you end up obviously consulting and sort of referring to those realities, but somebody sitting there having taken those inputs and then quite literally writes those questions out. Right now they have become slightly better with some automation tools that have come up over the last few years, where sure, it gets pre-filled a little bit, right, and it starts putting in a few pieces in. However, it's still not smart enough to really make those judgment calls whenever a question becomes a little more complex. Right, simple questions like, hey, do you have MFA turned on? Yes, you can probably answer that with a little more confidence, saying yes, it's a binary question. But the moment it starts talking about, do you have appropriate escalation procedures to manage risk, let's just say, like, that's a question, right? And you will have a questions in that flavor, quite a few of them. Now this is where it gets complex. So most teams would then have either a boilerplate answer, which may be even outdated, may not be representative of the reality, but that's what they try to stick it in. And why they do that is not because they're trying to hide anything, it's just because otherwise the alternative is way too cumbersome and complex. They'll have to go and collect all those pieces of information. They might even have to collect a whole bunch of screenshots and some automated inputs, and then assess them, and somebody will need to make a judgment call, create a report out of it, and then they can confidently go answer that question. And that's a lot of work, right? And that's a lot of time investment. And most of the time the companies are trying to weigh against, hey, what's my ROI on investment? Because it's not like
Hmm.
that's the only question that they've got to answer, or that's the only audit that they got to complete, or that's not the only sort of compliance check they need to meet. There's probably one following right behind it, which they need to get done tomorrow, right? So, like, I think there's this whole pressure about doing a lot of these, and then that gap between real time understanding those pieces and then kind of answering these. So what we have approached this as, not to get too lost into this, because there is, of course, a whole sort of day long conversation we can just have around these nuances of it. But the way we've approached this is, well, let's meet where the users are, right? Let's understand the realities of the environment. changing behavior of these GRC teams or any other security teams overnight is also not realistic. It's probably not going to happen. Why it's not going to happen? Because there's a reason why that process exists today, right? For better or for worse, it's working in many ways, and that's why companies have doubled down on it. What you want to do is you want to get right, insert yourself right in that process, and start doing that value addition right there with as little friction as possible, right? And so what we have said is, okay, great, structured data sets from our knowledge graph time machine, we can pull them and give you a state of reality and give you the answers accurately. Fantastic. If that's possible and a bunch of that can be brought in, let's do it, right? Let's integrate with your various systems, let's bring in all those pieces, and you will manage risk in real time and have the entire visibility.
Mm-hmm.
However, that may not tell you the whole picture. You may have a hybrid environment where it might be even difficult to go collect that information or even set up a connectivity. Forget even collecting information, right? And you may still want to capture screenshots or want to refer back to your standard operating procedures. Well, fantastic. Don't worry about it. Upload your screenshots, throw in your documents, throw in your past questionnaires that you've responded with, given your standard operating procedures. Upload the policies. And when I say these, it's quite literally uploading and throwing them in a drive. That's what you're doing. And that's where Uno is very good at, because it's very good at reading language. It's almost like a smart linguist at some level, right? So, and also a good parser, right? Like it understands everything from OCR type parsing to complex structure parsing to understanding the document things to nuances. So that's where the beauty comes in, because yeah, sure, give us all your raw unstructured stuff and let the system do the heavy lifting, which otherwise a human would do. Right? Somebody's going to look at those screenshots, read those documents, look at the standard operating procedures, and then determine what's relevant. How do I comb it together? How do I present it? We'll just hand it over to Uno, right? Just throw it in and let Uno do the work. And so that's the value add where we see a lot of our customers get super excited about, because that's one, it's not fun, it takes a lot of time, it's very cumbersome, and that's where the game changer really starts coming in. And that's where it's also very different from every other nuance which is in the market, which is saying, hey, don't worry about it, we'll help you turn around and get you into this API driven cloud native world. Well, great, everyone would like to be there, but in many large enterprises, getting to that reality of changing their entire stack or entire procedure, entire way they collect data is just not realistic, right? You can't do that, right? So anyway, I just want to pause at that, but that's the approach that we have taken. Meet the customers where they are, meet the users where they are, give them value today, not after they've done a whole year of work or 2 years of work and gone through a whole amount of sort of soul searching and restructuring and refactoring. But meet them where they are, give them value where they are. So that's the kind
Yeah.
of very intentional approach that we have taken.
Yeah, I think, I mean, to just get some, I mean, again, I feel like so many of my conversations with security leaders and GRC folks is really truly understanding the scale of the problem here, right? I think this isn't, um, there was a report by a big consulting firm that estimated something like 40% of an overall securities team's time is spent essentially on these paperwork type processes, right? Another CISO that I was talking with, he estimated 50%. And I think what's so frustrating for them in many cases is they don't really feel like that's moving the needle from an actual security perspective, right? Because I really think one of the challenges is that you really have two worlds coming together here, right? You have kind of this security world, which is really deeply thinking about the technology and how are the systems set up and how are they running, and then that's sort of overlapped with this very legal world of compliance and regulation, right? Where you're essentially trying to understand technology through legal language and these questions, right? And at times, I think it feels like sort of like talking about jazz or something, right? Like you can do it, but it sort of destroys all the joy of it. I mean, uh, uh, and um, and so I think what's fun and what's interesting, it also makes it challenging. Is you need to bring kind of both the models that can understand both sides, right? You need to and when we start to see people who are saying, oh, I'm just going to throw an LLM at this and suddenly I'm going to be able to solve it. I think those of us who are spending kind of all day thinking about this space and seeing the models that are actually doing it, we sort of shake our heads and say good luck, right? Because the LLMs are very good on the language side for the most part, but they aren't necessarily good at grabbing kind of some of the structured data, which is really more coming from the technical side. And so ideally, you want to kind of bring the two together, right? You want sort of data, particularly structured data, that is going to inform your language models, right? Almost, um, it's a little bit like the structured data sort of sets your outline. Okay, make sure that you stop at these 3 points in what you're going to tell me, and then you throw it to the LLM, and then it writes your story based on that outline. But if you don't have the structured data sort of setting the various points that you want to hit in the outline, that's when it comes up with like a poem, right? You're like, well, that's interesting but not really helpful. So yeah, I think it's going to be incredibly powerful what AI models can do here, but it's it's not going to just like snap your fingers and anybody is going to be able to do it, right? You're going to have to bring a lot of different pieces on the technology side to make it happen.
Right. So let's jump into that, because one of the beautiful things about what you all are doing is, you're providing a product, and that product is providing a service for the teams, but you're also providing education, because once an organization speaks to you, they're going to be more armed and more understanding of AI technologies and what it is that, you all do. Of course, everybody has heard of the large language models through things like ChatGPT, Claude, and Bard. So I'm sure that, when you speak to your prospects, they're like, okay, we understand that it's going to help us with the language pieces. Whether someone is a future customer or just someone that's interested in making the problem space go away, what kind of AI or machine learning technology should someone be looking at to kind of manage this challenge of an abundance of structured and unstructured data?
Yeah, it's a very thoughtful question, and I think it's very relevant in today's time. And the reason I deliberately again sort of say it like that it is relevant and it is thoughtful, is because I think the general consciousness of our society today has been consumed with generative AI and LLMs, and for good reason. I mean, they're yielding some interesting outcomes that we haven't seen in the past. So, the excitement is real and the excitement is fantastic. And we are also big believers in the evolution of these, sort of language based NLP and encoder models, encoder decoder models, transformer models coming to where they have reached today, right? Which is basically the GPT technology. But having said that, if you start looking at solving organizational and enterprise problems, it is not a one tool to solve all the problems, right? Like LLMs by themselves, or for that matter, any technology alone cannot solve all the problems. And I think Andy was alluding to that a little bit just a few minutes ago. The reason why you cannot do that is because of, I would say, three different big variables that influence every organization. One is the type of data, right? And the type of data, you have some unstructured data, text centric data, where sure you can take advantage of LLMs to an extent on some types of tasks. But then you also have structured data, and you have a lot of structured data sometimes. And in many cases, there's actually a nice mixture of structured and unstructured data that play well when you combine them. Now, this is where LLM starts getting a little trickier, because LLMs are not trained, or they are not adept at dealing with two different types of data sets. So that's one problem, right? Like on one vector or one variable, which is the data set variety. The second important part, or second very important variable, is the fact that the manifestation of this data alone is in multiple forms. And what I mean by that is there is a humongous effort around bringing all this data management and bringing all this together in a place that it can be processed, understood by any model whatsoever or any technology whatsoever, right? And so, and as an example, I'll give you one simple example which I think all of us can associate with. Say you have unstructured data sitting in PDF documents on one side, and you have a screenshot on the other, which is an image, a JPEG image or a PNG image. You need to process both of them along with some rows in a table. Now, unless you make them all sort of together in one place to kind of be brought together and then be combined together in some logical way, you're not going to get the value out of it. So the second challenge really is in bringing in all these different data sets from different places, the variety of data that we spoke about, the first vector, but then also combining them in meaningful ways in the right way, right? Also, you can't just throw them all in one place and expect that they would just do magic. And even the pre-processing and parsing and all can also take advantage of a lot of the developments in AI and machine learning. And then the third part, which is equally important part, and sometimes maybe the most important part, is domain specificity, right? So every organization and every role has domain specific tasks. For example, if I write a paragraph, right, suggesting something as an engineer, and a note to the team saying, hey, this is what my retrospective from an incident is. Let's just take it even cyber, right? It will sound in a certain way that has to make sense to incident responders and to engineers. And let's just assume that this was an incident related to an application. Then I would also use the jargon and the terminology and the syntax, which an application developer can understand and relate to and can actually go patch and fix it, right? So that's the way I would write that paragraph. However, if I was going to go relate, in fact, even the same incident, forget a different task, from a legal standpoint, because I wanted to go and report to the board, somehow it was of major significance, and I want to give a summary, it would be completely, I think, out of place if I started talking in terms of, hey, function call, blah, 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 or library so and so had these issues. And then I up level it and send it out to my board. Because what that would do is it would only cause confusion. That's the only outcome that'll happen because nobody will understand a thing, right? Not trying to say board members can't understand technology, but they are looking at stuff at a very different level, right? And they have too many things going on. So they don't have that mind space or bandwidth to start getting deeper into all the puzzles that the world of AppSec is looking at, right? And so therefore you will need to paraphrase or explain that in a way which is a C-level exact sort of a presentation metric, if you
Hmm.
may. And then again, if you have to report it publicly, let's say right now your SEC is saying, hey, I need to go put it out there, right? Which needs to be in a 8K or some other document of some form, right? Or whoever else that you need to report to. Again, that needs to take a shape, form, size, which would again make sense to the public, right? Which somebody who does not have visibility into the entire internal organizational context can still make sense of it and could do something about it because they are interested in knowing, hey, how risky is this? Was my personal information lost? Is my service going to be available? Like, is this really like end of the world or is this like a small issue? That's what they're interested in knowing, right? So the part I'm trying to make is that domain specificity becomes paramount even for the same case. Now, if you start splitting this in terms of different functions, right? What a finance function wants to do, what a cyber incident responder wants to accomplish, what a GRC personnel wants to do, what a marketing sales outreach person wants to accomplish, different trainings, they all have different contexts. And now your AI or ML system, if it's going to be the force multiplier for any of their tasks, needs to speak their language, needs to be in sync and in line with the expectations of that particular role, right? So those three things become very important. On one side, you've got the variety of data, the way you bring them in, and domain specificity, right? And so because of that, just one quick bit, I know I've probably stretched this a bit longer, but I wanted to set that context. We use a whole bunch of tools. We are basically a complex AI system that uses large language models, uses knowledge graphs, uses deep learning technology. Even we have extended out even things like OCR with newer deep learning technologies. We use a whole bunch of other ML techniques as well. And the beauty of the platform comes in combining all those rather than just doubling down on one alone. That's what I would kind of stop at.
There's a feature of this platform that we're using where you can share a screen, a picture to our live audience, and our producers let us know that you did want to share some, a bit of more about Uno and maybe show off an example to the audience. So I'd love to give you
Let's do
that
it.
time here.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's see if we can at least show some bits. Again, we'll encourage everyone to, sort of tell us at some point in time if you are interested, and we would be very happy to share a lot more in terms of maybe even doing a personalized demo or stuff like that. But what I'm going to show here is just the ramifications. Now, as soon as you upload this framework, Uno has the ability to quite literally read it like a human being and set it out in terms of sections, in terms of its pieces, etc., etc. Now we also have a little sample policy, a test policy that we are, messing around with. So we'll also see how it, automatically figures out which portions of this frame are already addressed, which portions need to be addressed, and it even tries to figure out the redundancy with respect to other frameworks. But before even you go there, you might want to just get a little understanding of, hey, what's this framework about? What the system does is it automatically generates an FAQ for you. It will generate questions, it will generate answers, and you can start reading them just to get a sense of, hey, what's this framework talking about, right? And once you've done that, if you have uploaded your policies, which is again quite literally uploading documents, you could say, hey, which portions are already covered? What do I have already which is, in good shape? So say you were looking at risk tolerance, and I'm assuming there's probably a section that is mapped. Of course, you could go and look at that particular section, the topic itself. You could view it back in file. The system is smart to figure out where it picked this up from. And you see the beauty here. It picked up exactly that paragraph from exactly that piece, very correctly classified as 322 risk tolerance. All of this was automatic. All of this was done by the AI system, Uno system, that is able to read, understand like a human. And then what it did was it also mapped to a policy. So, here it is with one particular policy. We have a little, sort of internal test policy called Uno bank policy that we kind of, mess around with. And you will see that it has also figured out all the text from that policy, given you, sort of, how close it is in terms of meaning, etc., etc. Now, let's just assume that you also wanted to see, hey, how does it map with the other frameworks that I need to kind of play with, right? And so let's maybe look at something like understanding risks, impacts, and harms, because this seems like generic enough. Pretty sure other frameworks also talk about it. Well, you click through and you will see that it does overlap with a whole bunch of different frameworks. And in this case, it picked up, something around NIST privacy regulation, which also talks about similar pieces. There's like a risk guidance one, which also has some of these that it, talks about. And same information that you see here can also be available in the way that you saw in terms of your policy mapping. You would start seeing also in terms of how similar these are. And as we saw earlier, not everything was mapped, right? There were a whole bunch of sections here that were not mapped because this is a new regulation. Well, you could ask the system to generate the policy for you. So you can also do that. There is a bunch of other things in this platform, but I'm not going to make this into a product demo, so I'll kind of stop at this point. Um, but I think the interesting takeaway here that I would mention is that I just wanted to give a little sneak peek that this system is for real. This system has this amazing immediate advantage of bring in your documents and see the magic yourself, if you may. Right. So I just wanted to sort of put it out there so that if anybody's interested, anybody who's listening to this webinar, listening to all the conversations that we are having here, doesn't walk out of this feeling like, oh, this seems too good to be true, and I don't know if it can even be built, right? So that's the main reason. I just wanted to throw it out there.
The mapping to the controls is where it's at. I think that is huge. There's a lot of benchmarks that organizations follow, and this was kind of that situation I was describing that I was in at that fintech startup, was mapping our controls, our gaps to these benchmarks, and it's really cool to see that you all have that. And I'm excited to see a full demo. I think we definitely got to do a session where we show a full demo, because
Yes.
anyone that's tuning in right now that is a GRC analyst is probably asking themselves questions about their workflow. Like, hey, I start with point A and I want to get to point Z,
Right.
but going to B, C, D, E, and onward is a very manual and could be complicated quest because of technology, but also because of your team as well. Like there is that big team intervention. And we're almost at the end of this session, so I did want to ask both of you a very important question. There's someone out there that's listening to this right now, that's watching this, maybe they're catching the replay, that want to be better at this complicated challenge of GRC, and they want to use things like automation, but cooler things like AI. What would be your piece of advice for them to get closer to using things like Uno, or get closer to implementing their own custom solutions? Let's start with you, Shashank.
Yeah, I think firstly, don't fear. and I think there is a there is a lot of sort of FUD around AI. So don't fear, get your hands on something, right? And I think the best way, of course, is get your hands on more specific systems out there like ours, which are sort of addressing that. So, if you're interested, well, reach out to us. We'll be more than happy to show you the stuff, maybe even set up a little test environment for you, play with it, feel for yourself, experience it, right? Now, in case you still want to do some work on your own before you even want to indulge in, speaking to, say, someone like us, well, I would say go start looking at even the broader LLMs today. Sure, they may not be accurate. They suffer from hallucinations. They have a bunch of other sets of problems that need to be addressed. And yes, systems like ours address it quite well. But start looking at those at least to get a feel in terms of the power of language and the power of how AI can approach some of these tasks, right? And so one could at least ask by asking questions.
Yeah.
Ask a question and ask that sort of Q&A chat engine to give you back a response and see how it talks to you. Now, of course, sometimes, like we've spoken before, as well, it may not be factual, right? But then, those machines are not meant to be fact finding machines, right? But at least you would see that the way they express it and the way they tell it, and you can give it prompts, right? To say, hey, put it like a GRC analyst, or explain it like you're an auditor, and you would see that they do a pretty decent job. They're able to understand language quite well. And when you come to someone like us, what you'll realize is that the gap of the factual data and the context and all gets bridged, and now you have the beauty of the language, but you also have things that you can rely on, things that you can actually run your systems on. So I think that's what I would say. Stop the fear, don't worry about it, you go get your hands on it. One another small piece I want to mention is, I think that AI has also created a massive amount of just mass hysteria around the fact that this might just take over not only our jobs but take over us as humans, right? And destroys us. The Terminator is on its way, right? Like, that's the story that's kind of spreading. I think we're very far away from it, even if we are ever going to be there, right? So I think,
Yeah.
like, today you should look at this as a hyper productivity tool, as a force multiplication vehicle that you can get your hands on today, and do your job faster, better, get more productive. Like, I think, go to that mindset rather than this fear factor of, hey, this super intelligence will come and eat me up. So don't worry about the second part, that Godzilla ain't there in town, it's still in Hollywood. you know Take advantage of the first one.
So I'm going to flip the question on its head a little bit for Andy, because I think that one piece that cybersecurity practitioners don't get to appreciate as much is the go-to-market piece of a great solution. So Andy, someone's tried to do this on their own. They need the help of someone like Uno AI. What could they expect? They're at the front door. They're at the Uno.ai website, which I would highly encourage everybody to check out, by the way. They're at the website. What could they expect after they, land on there? What should they do?
I mean, yeah, pretty easy. If you're on our website, you can book a call with us, a demo, right? You can join the wait list as well, right? Because uh, to actually get in the queue to test this product, and we have we set up POVs, proof of values for customers, but obviously we try and really white glove those. So we sort of have somewhat of a limited queue of those, but join the wait list and we can help you kind of get into that. I think in general, I think it's just I think I encourage people to sort of really think about the jobs that they need to get done as a GRC team, right? And start to think about the capabilities for AI to start handling some of those. Um, my background, I spent quite a bit of time in the insurance space, cyber insurance specifically. And the thing that really catches people in uncomfortable positions from a legal perspective around these incidents is that they just didn't do the job um, at all or with any level of detail, right? Like they have all of these things that they say in their, in their policies, but they're not operationalized, or they've just flat out ignored, sort of standard frameworks. And so I think it's, there's an opportunity for AI to essentially systematize the things that they need to do as an organization in a way that would be a huge lift for them with humans, but with AI they can sort of do it in a matter of minutes, right? Which is pretty powerful. And honestly, you know, machines are just better at doing a lot of things sort of consistently, right? Like we don't hand build almost anything these days, right? Like, you know, you might get like a handcrafted wallet or something, right? And pay like $900 to Gucci for it, but for the most part, almost everything is built by machines, because they're faster, they're more precise, etc. And you know, there's obviously lots of humans sort of helping in that process, but not doing like the individual stitching and all of the little pieces, right? It's
Right.
yeah, it's called progress. Um, yeah, I think
Hey,
that's
well, I love you all's tagline, helping every cybersecurity practitioner operate at the level of an expert. I love what you all are building. I'm honored and blessed to say that you all are a partner of Hacker Valley, and Hacker Valley is a partner of Uno AI. I would highly encourage everyone to check out Uno AI's website. Let's bring it up one more time. Big thank you to you both, Shashank and Andy, for hosting this session, you know, shedding a light on the GRC arena, but also through this really cool hot lens of artificial intelligence. Check out Uno AI. And until we see everybody next time, be good, be safe, and we'll speak soon. Thank you.
Fantastic.